everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast, otherwise known as CAPROPCAST for short, where we discuss different ways that we can defend the individual natural right to private property, which we believe comes from God, that is bestowed by a divine source and therefore cannot be arbitrarily revoked by human power. So we like to go into various culture war issues that we believe have the potential to threaten private property rights or have implications thereof, and discuss how the common man can defend himself against such tyrannical trends. And to discuss that today, we brought on a Mr. Trevor Loudon. He's a renowned filmmaker who directed Enemies Within, amongst others. He's also authored several books. And with that, I'd like to kick over a personal introduction to Mr. Loudon here. And then right after that, as always, we will dive into the meat of the issue. So thank you so much for joining us, Trevor, and you can introduce yourself a little bit. We'll get into it.
Well, thanks so much, Philip. It's great to be on. And greetings to all the listeners. My name is Trevor Loudon. You can tell by my accent, I'm originally from New Zealand. I live in the United States. I came to the United States basically because I believe the United States is in a Marxist revolution, and if the United States goes under, so does everybody else. This is the tent pole that's holding the world up. So what I've done is made several movies, written about 8 books so far, mainly dealing with the Marxist infiltration of the US government and other agencies. I'm just doing one right now, completing on the Marxist Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. So my basic thesis is most of the negative phenomenon we see around us, from open borders to transgender indoctrination to woke Hollywood, is all Marxist. It is all driven by cultural Marxism, but actually also by China and Cuba and foreign nations as well. So we're in a revolution, but because Marxism is much more dispersed than it was in the old Cold War days, a lot of people don't understand what it is. So my job is to try and connect those dots and bring it, so we can, if we cannot defeat our enemy if we don't even understand or identify our enemy.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And so the kind of crux of your argument here is that, in a sense, defeating Marxism or defeating these far-left egalitarian trends and movements is actually more complicated and more difficult now in many ways than it was during the Cold War, for the simple reason that it's a lot more decentralized, is what you're saying.
Yes. And it's metastasized too. It's like the analogy I draw is, say if you had cancer 30 years ago, and you cut 90% of it out of your body, like the Soviet Union goes away for a while. You cut 90% of it out, but then you stop all treatment. What is your body going to look like 30 years hence if it lasts that long? Well, now our universities are Marxist. It was hard to say we won the Cold War when almost all of our universities are Marxist. Many of our churches are Marxist. Our kids are being indoctrinated in Marxism at every level of their education. The environmental movement is running roughshod over our economy. Our military's been downgraded, all sorts of things. If this is winning the Cold War, I hate to see what losing it would have looked like, because we are losing right now with a bit of pushback here and there, but we're still on the losing side of this. Hopefully we can turn that around soon.
Well, and I believe we can, because I think recently we are starting to turn the tide. We won several crucial victories. We defeated Bud Light. They took tremendous financial losses because of their catastrophic decision to sponsor Dylan Mulvaney, who's a freak, just a mentally ill freak. That's what he is. And Target has been forced to drastically scale back its open, explicit support for LGBTQ pride. I'm sure they still do support it and they still fund it, but at least they were forced to scale back the very explicit, promotion and depictions thereof. And then on top of that, this isn't necessarily directly related, but it's worth mentioning. Recently, we've especially won probably dozens of crucial victories in the last 2 or 3 years against gun control and for gun rights. So, these mainly due to some 220 Article 3 federal judges that President Trump appointed to the bench, who've delivered some excellent rulings.
And the end of Roe v. Wade is another thing, which is
definitely
the result of 50 years of hard effort by a lot of anti-abortion activists, and President Trump appointing judges who would at least rule in the right way in some things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and absolutely. And what we saw in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Association, it was an example of the court ruling that the ruling that they overturned, which in this case was Roe v. Wade, was plain and simple that it was bad law with no foundation in the Constitution. The fact of the matter is that in the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution and in the main body, there is no right to abortion whatsoever. There's nothing that even implicitly or in any way alludes to such a right. So
no, it's purely made up.
So yes, Roe v. Wade was its constitutional analysis was weak at the very best. So it's good that we finally have a court that corrected that, and the left predictably lost its mind because abortion is one of their primary sacraments.
Yes.
So they and what really bothers me about that is it's one thing when you hear people say that they have practical reasons for wanting some abortion to be legally tolerated, but there's a lot of people on the left, including the major institutions, that they actually celebrate it. It's really sick. It's like it's this demonic celebration of death.
Yeah. It's not just the to try to make things easier for some poor woman who see themselves as having no option. This is an actual gleeful, diabolic slaughtering of babies, and the closer to birth they are, the better. Yeah. The more happier they are. This is a culture of death. And you think, if you look at it, we are in a spiritual battle. You got God on one side and the opposition on the other. And the opposition is going to be anti-life. It's going to be pro-death. It's going to be anti-family. It's going to be anti-religion. It's going to be all of the things that make life worth living.
Quite so, and I've noticed that in abundance in my time on university campuses, even ostensibly conservative university campuses like Pepperdine, they are heavily infiltrated by the cultural Marxists, no doubt.
Yes.
I saw gender insanity being taught on campus in various classes, particularly in the sociology department, but that's not that surprising because sociology is really just cultural Marxist indoctrination disguised as an academic pursuit.
Yeah. Sociology is socialistology. So by definition, sociology is socialist. And yes. You get the very occasional conservative sociologist, but they're as rare as hen's teeth.
Well, I would say conservatives who are interested in sociology, they're more likely to become historians or anthropologists because those are real academic disciplines. Sociology is not a real academic discipline.
Yeah, I take your point. That is a fair point.
From anything I can tell. But now, so what we're talking about with cultural Marxism here is you mentioned, very poignantly just a moment ago that the modern left, which is cultural Marxists, they're fundamentally very anti-family. We've noticed that communism in all of its forms, it's always been very anti-family, but which makes sense because it's a totalitarian ideology, so they don't want any institution, particularly a small-scale local one, that might compete with the totalizing state for people's allegiance. So that makes perfect sense from their standpoint. It's a cold calculus. But what I've noticed is that particularly ever since the end of the Cold War, and even a little bit before it, like in the 80s, for example, but particularly since 1991, what I've noticed about the modern institutional left is they seem to have abandoned, for the most part, the open promotion of class warfare. They don't really bother much with that anymore. What they're concerned with promoting now is social conflict based on race and gender. And I was wondering if you could go into why you think that is, or what social and cultural and economic forces might have contributed to that divide, that forking off.
Yeah,
so
that's a great question. Look, in the Western countries, the class struggle was, except maybe parts of Britain and Germany, the class struggle in Italy, the class struggle, especially in America, was never popular. America was very socially mobile. Mm-hmm. You could start out dirt poor and end up filthy rich. Mm-hmm. You could start out filthy rich and end up dirt poor too, as it should be. Mm-hmm. And so it was the American Communist movement never really grew beyond, got to about 100,000 members in the 40s in the aftermath of World War II when things were going well for them. But it didn't become a real mass movement like it did in Italy or France. So from the 50s onwards, they started to branch out much more into race and gender. Gloria Steinem, all the feminists of the time, I'm just trying to think of the famous books.
The feminine mystique? Or?
The feminine mystique, yeah, but I'm just trying to think of the names of these women. They're usually on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, so they started to get more into the gender and race, and that really magnified from the 60s because you got an influence of Maoism. Now, Mao drew on Stalin. Stalin posited the idea of the nationalities question. You know, in Russia too, when they took over, they didn't have a big class structure there either. They didn't have an industrial working class at all in Russia. It was peasants. It was a feudalist society, and technically a communist society is supposed to go primitive communism, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, communism. That's the 5 stages of development. Russia and China basically went from feudalism to socialism. They skipped the capitalism stage. That was totally contrary to Marx, and the economies collapsed. So what did Lenin do in the 20s? He brought in the new economic policy. He brought in capitalism for a while to stop the country collapsing, and then Stalin came in and went back to more traditional socialism. The same thing happened with Stalin. Realized too that if they were going to have revolutions in all these little stans and states all over the Russian Empire, which were largely Muslim or peasant run, the class struggle was not going to get anywhere. So what you had to do, you had to find a country and you had to find a minority within a country, stoke up their sense of grievance, stoke up their sense of oppression, and turn them into the revolutionary force.
The vanguard. The
vanguard, so that the revolution would not be run by the working class, it would be run by the oppressed minorities. And so this is what Black Lives Matter is. This is Maoism.
And it's funny you bring that up because I definitely see how that is occurring to a great extent. However, the trend I noticed that's fascinating is I've been to a lot of protests and rallies, you know, especially ever since 2020 when the COVID lockdowns and the George Floyd riots began and things like that. And what I noticed about the leadership, the core leadership of most Black Lives Matter and Antifa mobs, is that the vast majority of the leadership are white kids that come from an upper middle class background. So they use the language of proletarian revolution, and they like to cosplay as revolutionaries, and they love to talk about how they want oppressed people of color and sexual and gender minorities to form the vanguard of this revolutionary movement. And yet we find that by and large the leadership of these movements is drawn from white upper middle class kids who are probably mostly straight, even though some of them may claim not to be because it's hip to not be straight, but sure. Most of them are probably straight. So why is it, do you think, that these movements generally work out that way in terms of how they're led?
Look, communism has always been an upper middle class movement. It's always been Marx was supported by a very rich man, Engels and his family. Mao Zedong came from a very wealthy background. Fidel Castro came from a wealthy background. So did Che Guevara. Most of these leaders. Communism is not about sharing the wealth. Communism is about using minorities, using aggrieved people to overturn the existing social order so that a new elite may come forward to centralize all wealth and all power in a very few hands. Whittaker Chambers joked about this. He was an American communist who was part of the Soviet apparatus during World War II, part of the Soviet spy ring. He became a Christian, left communism, and testified against Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss got sent to jail for perjury. But Whittaker Chambers would say, in America, the working class votes Democrat, the middle class votes Republican, and the elites vote communist.
Very fascinating analysis.
All these major communists were from elite families.
It's funny. I seem to remember you mentioned Fidel Castro came from a pretty wealthy background. I think before he became a self-styled revolutionary, he was actually a young lawyer. So which makes perfect sense. Are you? I've read in various books, and I agree with this analysis that the working class is generally incapable of organically forming its own revolutionary vanguard or acting as its own revolutionary vanguard. So, do you think one of the reasons why the leadership of these revolutionary far left vanguard movements, one of the reasons that they're overwhelmingly white and upper middle class, is because these are the university educated sons and daughters of the so-called intelligentsia?
Absolutely.
And they provide that organizational skill. I don't know if skill is the right word, but they provide that kind of skill to give the illusion of a working class revolution.
Psychopathic personality too. A lot of these young rich kids are very guilt-ridden, and they're very damaged. They've come from dysfunctional families. I'd rather be born in a middle-class family than an upper-class family. Thanks very much. Elites aren't the great place to be brought up in. You get a very false sense of entitlement. You get a very false sense of reality.
They're spoiled.
They're spoiled. Not always, of course, but commonly. The Weather Underground terrorists, Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, both came from wealthy families. But they've got this guilt, they've got this anger, they've got this bitterness, they've got this resentment. This is the spirit of Cain.
It is, yes.
It is the spirit of Cain, The American Republic was founded on the spirit of Abel, honesty, integrity, a working person, loyal, God-fearing. Cain was resentful, bitter, rebellious, Why did Satan leave heaven? Because he'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven.
As Paradise Lost pointed out.
Milton, Paradise Lost,
What was it? He said in Paradise Lost, Satan says better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven.
Yeah. So that's the ego. So when you're born into the elite, you're quite often dominated by your ego because you're just so much better than everybody else. And you have a right to decide how others will run. Bill Gates, don't you think maybe he's got this born to rule attitude that people are so lucky that there's someone as intelligent as me to protect them from their own stupidity, to cull the population to manageable levels or whatever. And so communism's always been a movement of the elites. And it uses the middle class is the enemy. So the lower class can often be embittered, less educated, desperate. And so the elites use the middle class, the lumpen proletariat, to destroy the middle class. The middle class is where the sense is. The middle class is where the ethics and the godliness is. The middle class is the stable strata in any society. You haven't got the arrogance of the elites, and you haven't got the desperation and the bitterness of the downtrodden.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I've also read in various analyses, and I think I agree with this one too, that the reason why the elites have this instinctive fear and loathing of the middle class is because in the middle class they see a group of people that haven't attained the level of wealth or social prestige as them, but are wealthy enough and influential enough to send their kids to university, to afford potentially, if they manage themselves right, a better life for their sons and daughters. And what the elite doesn't want is they don't want future competition. So the way they obviate that future competition is by crushing the middle class anytime they get half a chance.
Look, absolutely. And this is why another reason why the left are focused on the color and race. In America, very strong middle class who was not interested in revolution. But you've got black Latino populations who can be convinced, and in of many cases they were discriminated against. Mm-hmm. They can be told there's no future for them, there's no way of getting out of their poverty unless they join together. And same with women. How do you get a wealthy, middle class young woman into the revolution? You can't tell her that she's impoverished. You've got to tell her she is prejudiced because of her gender. Mm-hmm. How do you get a wealthy young homosexual man in the revolution? He's got money. He's all right. He's doing okay. He doesn't have to worry about kids and whatever. But you've got to tell him he's oppressed. You've got to tell him he's this prejudice against them. You've got to tell them all these things. So you've got to find a wedge issue. And in America, the wedge issue, class has not been an effective wedge issue. Gender and race have been much more effective for the revolution.
Well, in the case of the young middle-class woman you just mentioned, one primary plank of messaging from the Democratic Party and its corporate allies to young women between the ages of 18 and let's say 35 or 40, the single ones and the ones that are at university, is that they hit them with the abortion and quote unquote reproductive rights messaging, because they convince them that any attempt to curb in any way their legal and free access to abortion services or the like, or contraceptives, whatever.
That's oppression.
Is an assault upon their dignity.
Yeah.
Or upon their very bodies.
Yeah.
And it's funny. Like, I see all kinds of lies being directed at women. I honestly think young women in the Western world, they are the single most lied to demographic in the history of the world.
Yeah, they tell them they can't be happy having kids and raising a family.
Yeah.
They've got to have the fulfillment of a career. And I'm absolutely fine with women having a career.
Me too.
Absolutely. I want my daughter to have the very best opportunity she possibly can. Mm-hmm. But you don't denigrate womanhood. You don't denigrate those who really want to have kids, raise a great family, and are willing to put their career second. There is a perfectly good role for women like that. And actually, the majority of the women need to be like that.
And it's funny you mention all of this because I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson, and as you know, for 25 years he had a clinical psychology practice, and he's talked extensively about how for a long time he was contracted with some of the top law firms in Alberta, Canada. I was listening to that
2 days ago.
Yeah, that's right, and he said that he was tasked with trying to ensure that they retained as many of their top performing female lawyers as possible, and his clients included very intelligent, very attractive women who were senior partners at their firms. But he said literally with a margin of like 90 to 95%, when they started to hit late 20s, early 30s, they'd always been top academic performers, top performers in their career. They would fall away and they would quit, because he said they would hit a point that they would go, oh my God, what am I doing here? I want a family.
Yeah.
And that's a concern that men generally don't have. And he said he observed this, like dozens or hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And so, when you see, these ultra feminists, these cultural Marxist feminists, banging on about how, women earn 77 cents for every dollar that a man makes, it's a load of garbage, because they deliberately fail to factor in, the fact that on average women make very different life decisions and very different career decisions than men. They're more likely to, when they have kids and or get married, they take time out of the workforce, and then they make less money, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, as my mother did that.
Yes.
So that's fine. But it's that was, he said, I think it was at 19, most of them say they will put their career first.
Yeah.
At 30, they mostly say, well, no, I really want a family now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem with how these women are lied to is, it's generally fine if they're 19 and they don't want to have kids, but as they start to hit, late 20s, early 30s, the probability of them having trouble having kids increases, and also that will tend to, if they do end up having any, they end up having less, and then the result is the low fertility rate and population decline.
Yeah, the democratic implosion that we see in Japan, America, Western Europe, most Western countries. Just about everywhere but Africa, really.
Yes, and the Middle East, the Islamic world, where for obvious reasons fertility rates remain very high, as well as among the Muslim populations of Western countries. Their fertility rates are quite high. But it's I do think that cultural Marxism lies to everyone, but I honestly think it lies to young single women the most.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment. I think. The women are targeted because women are, they have to become the new working class. They are the oppressed. Half the country is oppressed by the other half of the country. And most women just laugh at that. But if you've been through college for 3 years and you've done enough sociology, you'll probably buy it. Yeah. And by the time you're 30, you might have still bought it. But there's a lot of bitter women in their 50s who put their careers first and now they wish they had grandchildren.
Yeah.
There's a lot of women like that. And so I'm all for just make up your mind as an individual. If you want to have kids, go for it. Have 7 if you want. As many as you can afford, go for it. We need them.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. Especially in the developed world, we need as many as can be birthed because to meet the challenges that are coming up. And that's the thing is in most Western developed countries we have these incredibly top heavy welfare and social security states. We're not going to be able to fund them for much longer because there aren't enough young workers, to contribute the necessary resources.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see, once, that payday comes and the chickens come home to roost on that one, we're going to see basically mass starvation of people older than a certain age, who are Social Security dependent.
Well, yeah, if people think that Social Security in its current form is going to be around in 10 years, let alone 20 years,
no.
I think you're very you're optimistic to the point of Pollyanna-ishness.
Yes.
Start saving now, start getting your affairs in order, get into a business, because Social Security is very unlikely to be around in its current form going forward. Who knows what could happen, but it's very, very unlikely and not something you should wisely count on.
And even if it is, our currency is increasingly worthless. So, even if you are getting, that check every month, we might reach a point where it's like the Weimar Republic, it doesn't matter the cash.
You get your check and you can have milk in your coffee that month.
Maybe, it might get you a couple loaves of bread.
Yeah.
If you're really lucky. That happened in the Weimar Republic and it happened in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
In the 80s and 90s. We appear to be, slowly or maybe not so slowly, headed in that direction right there. But what I wanted to kind of pivot to a little bit, although it is a continuation of what we were discussing a couple minutes ago, is, we've talked a lot about the evolution of Marxism, how it tends to operate. I have read that one of the turning points here in America for when the cultural Marxist poison began to be introduced into our collective system was when the Frankfurt School migrated from Germany to Columbia University, and then it kind of metastasized from there, and then other universities, the faculty lounges took it up. Can you shed a little light as to why there seemed to be almost in the 80s and 90s, there seemed to be a Cambrian explosion of the promotion of that Frankfurt School garbage to the point that by the time 2020 came around, the country was ripe for BLM summer?
Yeah. Well, exactly. See, the Frankfurt School started in the 30s, but it was also... Gramsci was coming into his own a bit later than that too, and what they were looking at is Marxism had failed because Marxism said that the revolution would start first in the industrialized countries. Britain and Germany and the United States should have the first communist revolutions. But no, it happened in backward Russia. And after World War I, the communist parties of Europe tried to start several revolutions in Germany, Hungary, and other countries, and they all failed because the working class would not support them. So Gramsci came up with the idea, said, well, why is this? Because for hundreds of years, the system has indoctrinated people. The system, the church, the government, the education system has made people happy being part of the middle class, loyal to their government, loyal to their military, loyal to their cultural institutions.
Their king.
Their king, their church. And they were happy to be German or happy to be Italian or Hungarian or whatever they were. They were proud of that. So Gramsci said, well, we have to take over the institutions and destroy all of that indoctrination. We have to make people unhappy with the church, unhappy with the government. They want to change their views through education. And the Frankfurt School was following a similar pattern, but they focused a lot on sexuality, breaking down existing sexual norms. But if you look at, one of I think the second plank in the Communist Manifesto, break down the family.
Makes sense.
One of the first. So you change the sexual morality. And that's what the Nazis did too. They basically advocated free love for all the teenagers. And so
Aryan ones.
Aryan ones, yes. But
With other Aryans.
With other Aryans, yes. But it was all, they'd have youth camps and they would just encourage, just rampant promiscuity.
And
they wanted to break down the existing sexual morality.
Men in the Waffen-SS, they were encouraged, whether it was in or out of wedlock, they were encouraged to try to father multiple children.
Yes.
For the Reich.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Nazis said, even if they're born out of wedlock and, the father's, on the front lines and the mother can't take care of them by herself, then they can be turned over to the state to raise them.
Yes.
As good Aryan citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was, eugenics, breeding the master race. Doesn't matter if they're born in wedlock or whatever, the state will take over. But so when it came to America, See, in the 60s, you had a whole bunch of things coming together. The Frankfurt School had been going for 30 years by then and had expanded in Marcuse and all that. He was in Berkeley, and it had expanded. It was getting a little bit of traction, But in the 60s, you had this generation who had been spoiled rotten by their parents.
Yeah.
Because all these people who went through the Depression of World War II did not want their kids to suffer like they did. So they tended to overcompensate and spoil them. Then Dr. Spock, the Marxist, told every American parent, don't be a parent, be your child's friend.
Oh.
Just break this hierarchical parent bossing children around. No, be their friend, develop their creativity. So that added to the spoiled bratness.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the churches were losing sway because in 1956, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had a very deep socialist past, brought in the Johnson Amendment to the tax code telling all churches they could not endorse candidates from the pulpit or lose their tax-free status. And they took that to mean you can't talk any politics at all. Mm-hmm. And all the gutless pastors said hallelujah to that. So you had all of these cultural forces come together at once. They abandoned prayer in school in 1964, I think it was, and the sexual revolution of the 60s. It all came together. So you had the Vietnam War, the Soviets, and that they spent more money on the American peace movement and the college campuses than they did supporting their North Vietnamese allies. So all of that demoralization, all of that change in morality, situation ethics came in the 60s. That was by Joseph Fletcher, a Communist Party member, posing as a Episcopalian divinity professor.
Of course.
Wrote a book saying that the old morality of the Old Testament is passé. It's old hat. We got to have situation ethics, meaning you look at all the moral choices before you and you make the most loving one. And the definition of loving was very loose and very feminized. Inclusion. That's it. So all of this came together in the 60s. So that 60s generation, by the 90s, they were running Bible colleges. They were running history departments in universities and sociology departments. So you saw the revolution of the 60s take hold again in the 90s because these people were now running things.
So this all, when you talk about situational ethics, I think another way of stating it would be cultural relativism.
Yes.
It seems to me that the two are very closely related there.
Yes.
And so this is the story, and you went into this in your film Enemies Within the Church.
Yes.
To a great extent. This is what turned the so-called mainline Protestant denominations into what they are today.
Yep.
Into just really the clown show that they are. It doesn't even vaguely resemble biblical Christianity.
Yeah.
They really have just become, cultural Marxist feel-good clubs,
Yes.
where everybody just tries to feel good about how they are at any particular moment. I mean, There's even, I think it's somewhat satirical, but there's a saying here. It says, "No sin, please. We're Episcopalians." Which it makes perfect sense.
Well, that's right. The Old Testament's been completely abandoned. It's all turns on. God is love. So God loves you unconditionally, no matter what you do. Well, there's nowhere in the Bible that says God loves you unconditionally. There's conditions at every turn. Well, sin no more. Go forth and sin no more. There's more talked about You go in most churches today, most of the mainstream churches, you won't even hear the word sin.
No, you won't. And what I seem to recall from the Old Testament that seems to have been forgotten. You've gone into this a little bit. Is that just to bring out one example? When the Hebrews or the Israelites were being sent to subdue and conquer the land of Canaan, which would be their covenant inheritance, they were told about the heathen peoples, the Canaanites that inhabited the place, and how they sacrificed their children in their furnaces to their false demonic god Moloch, and which is a manifestation of Satan, obviously, as was Baal and all the rest of that pantheon. But God actually said, "And they practiced abomination in my sight, and therefore I abhorred them." He said, "Therefore I abhorred them." It literally said he hated them, so he had come to hate them. And so this is something that I think much of the modern church has forgotten.
Absolutely, it's the interest, pietism. The antinomianism, which is the abandonment of the Old Testament, plus all this feel-good Marxism, this dumbing down. As churches become more businesses too, there's always been the incentive to keep the people in the pews. And how do you keep people in the pews? You soften the message and make it as ear-tickling as you possibly can. So most Christianity in America today is not very Christian.
No,
not really. Some churches don't even have crosses anymore. But so this has dumbed down the whole culture. But this really started from the 60s and 70s, the Vietnam generation, the spoiled, rotten generation, who took power in the 90s and the early 2000s. So it's gone on steroids since then.
And of course, these the members of this generation, the intelligentsia members that seize power, many of them have gone on to take up faculty positions at our universities. Most terrifyingly. And, I've seen this firsthand even at ostensibly conservative campuses like Pepperdine.
Absolutely.
I had a sociology professor at Pepperdine. I mean, she's completely insane. She's out of her mind. And she's, up there telling us that in the United States in 2023 or 2024, that being a black person is incredibly dangerous, not because of inner city gangs, not because of thugs and criminals in the ghetto, but because of the white patriarchal power establishment. In spite of the fact that overwhelmingly statistic after statistic, including those published by left-leaning think tanks and researchers, prove over and over again that statistically the greatest danger to the black male in his teens or 20s is another black male in his teens or 20s. Overwhelmingly,
everybody knows this. Look, if Pepperdine was really a conservative university, it wouldn't have a sociology department
at all. There's no need for it.
Yeah, that's right. It's like having a witchcraft department.
It's not a real academic discipline. It's cultural Marxism disguised loosely and vaguely with a veneer of academic-sounding terminology that will just pass muster in the mind of an inexperienced, naive 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah.
And for them it passes as a major.
Well, see, this is where old Marxism comes in. So how do these people take over these institutions? Well, the old Marxists, Leninists, were experts at taking over a union or a business thing or a local government. So what they do, this is how they take over a union. They get a couple of guys elected to the union executive, right? Because nobody really cares and they just get voted on.
Board of directors.
And so then after a couple of elections, they get a couple more. And then they hire the secretary, they hire the administration staff, and they make sure they're all Marxists. And especially the people who run the elections, so they can get control of the electoral process. And in 3 or 4 years, you can take over a union of 400,000 members and have all those union dues and all that influence to further Marxism, which they've done. Every major union in the country is now communist controlled. So that's how they do the colleges too. You get a conservative professor will hire a liberal if they're good at their job. But a liberal professor or a liberal chancellor or rector will only hire other leftists,
right?
Because they consider that their revolutionary duty. Conservatives are evil people. They're holding back the revolution. So you only have to get a couple of liberal guys in a department and they will ostracize the conservatives. They will drive out the conservatives and get hold of the hiring process. So only Marxists get hired. And in 10 years, you can take over any university or Bible college you want if you're really organized.
Well, and where the left has an edge here too, naturally, I think, is that leftists are much more likely to have a worldview that consists of them believing that the personal and the political are indistinguishable.
Yes.
Whereas right wingers, and conservatives, they're more likely to, to put it indelicately, they're more likely to have a life outside of that. And so what that means is that they don't always regard the personal as political, or vice versa. I've met some right wingers that do, but far fewer.
Yeah,
and so the result is that they don't have this obsession with promoting their desired revolution the way the left does. So what leftists will do is, their attempts to spearhead the vanguard of this socialist revolution, it pervades everything that they do and everything that they think.
Yeah, look, we will give people the benefit of the doubt. Okay, I don't agree with your politics, but you're a great mathematician.
Right.
So I'll hire you, but a leftist would never do that.
No.
You can be the best mathematician in the world, but if you're not a leftist, you're not getting hired.
Right.
And so we have to, and it's been out to our detriment that we haven't understood that the left's politics and work, it's all one. It's all goes together. The revolution is their life. We have churches, we have families, we have hobbies, we have interests. We're interested in art or motor racing or whatever we're interested in.
Real
fishing.
careers.
Real careers. But they have the revolution. That's
right.
So who's going to win? Somebody who's a small group is completely dedicated to the revolution and lives it 24/7, or more people who are more focused or more dispersed in their interests, and they think everybody else is like them. They do not understand the revolutionary mindset. And these people are criminals. Most good people find it hard to understand why someone would be a criminal.
That's
Most conservatives find it hard to understand why somebody could labor their whole life to destroy their country.
That's right.
So they give them the benefit. It doesn't really mean that. Surely not. They give them too much benefit of the doubt. And that is taken advantage of. And
that's why until literally, I think the last 2 or 3 years maybe, the right has in most cases in this country and in the wider Western world been on the defensive. Whereas the cultural Marxist progressive vanguard left has generally been on the offensive. Now, I do think that very recently that has started to change, for reasons that, I mentioned a little bit earlier. I do think that I see an awakening among parents as to the threat that their children are under from, frankly, these perverts and freaks. I mean, let's be honest about a man who calls himself a woman and wears a thong and twerks in front of the face of a 6-year-old is that they are a freak and they are a sexual predator. Anybody that will do that. And I think more and more parents, including some that, might even describe themselves as generally left-leaning people and as registered Democrats, they're starting to see this and they're starting to really understand what not all LGBTQ people, but the LGBTQ agenda institutionally is about.
Yeah.
And this is very bad too for the ordinary gay person, for example, that just wants to be left alone and live his life in private and peace. It's terrible for them because studies have shown that in the last 2 or 3 years, acceptance of the LGBTQ population in Western countries has actually declined.
Exactly, and this is the same. Most black people aren't Black Lives Matter radicals.
No,
but it's a polarizing thing, and you're told to choose. Are you with us or are you with Uncle Tom?
Yes,
and this kind of things. But this is all designed to do this. It's all about dividing and conquering. So, but and the point there is, what we've seen in the last few years is most people are basically socially conservatives. Even most liberal soccer moms want a good, sound education for their kids. Most black people in this country respect religion. They love their kids. They don't like abortion. They don't like the radical gay agenda, and they don't like their kids having to compete with illegal immigration.
That's right.
And they don't like the crime. So that is why someone like Trump, who would actually address social conservative issues, got a lot of traction with black people, Latino people, etc. And someone like Mitt Romney, who wouldn't,
right,
and John McCain, who wouldn't, And both Bushes, who didn't get a lot of traction with those people. You know, it is faith, family, and freedom that motivates people. Even many on the so-called left.
That's right. And here's what I'll say to that. Some of the most culturally and socially and morally conservative commentary I've ever heard has come from the pulpits of Black Baptist churches. You know, they do not pull punches. They don't mince words. You know, they say, you know, that you are not going to, you know, parade around, you know, open sodomites in front of our kids.
Yep.
You know, or in the words of Mark Robinson, you know, black guy, Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina.
I know, Mark Robinson.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
very
absolutely.
hardcore.
Yeah, he famously said, you know, you're not going to teach our kids that filth. You know, he rightfully called it what it is, because when it's taught to children, it's filth. And so, you know, this idea that I think the white upper middle class bourgeois, you know, kind of tries to promote to us that Black Americans are fundamentally social progressives is a lie. Now, I do think the way that the Democratic Party captures the majority of their vote every election season, it's by manipulating them into voting for the welfare state.
Yes.
And I think the way that they've done that, and I think you'll agree, is because Lyndon B. Johnson deliberately designed his so-called Great Society programs as a scheme to keep them trapped in an endless cycle of, you know, out-of-wedlock children and welfare poverty.
Well, as he said, we'll get them inwards voting Democrat for 200 years.
Yep.
He was pretty explicit about it. And so this is where we've been let down by our elites again, because our elites are about making money and social engineering. Our middle class doesn't like this stuff. That is why the middle class takeover of the Republican Party and taking it away from the elites is a very, very good thing.
Yes.
You know, and it is happening. It is happening. I go to a lot of Republican Party meetings now, and it's a lot less rhino-ish and a lot more grassroots than it's ever been for a long time. And that is going to continue, because we have been let down by the elites of our churches, the elites in our government, and this is the time for the middle class and those who would like to be middle class to actually take over the leadership roles in society again. That is where we need to be going.
Do you think that, you know, that rising force, that tide, or, you know, that coalition, if you want to call it that, you know, these ordinary middle class, down to earth people, that populists that are taking over the Republican Party, do you think that this is a force that can deliver us at least electoral victory come November?
Well, all things. Well, put it this way: I don't know if it can. I think it can. But if we don't go there, we have no chance.
Right.
You know, the old John McCain or George Bush style of Republican Party is doomed.
Yes, the Nelson Rockefellers.
The Nelson Rockefeller, all that is doomed. It's gone. The only thing that can save the GOP now is this grassroots, populist, middle-class values, faith, family, freedom. That's what we need to be emphasizing. So I'm applauding it. Whether it can save us or not, I don't know. I think it can, but not doing that is a guaranteed recipe for failure.
And the way you know that you're right when you say that the old guard Republican Party is finished is you can tell by how terrified they are. You know, when you listen to, you could say, I guess, Main Street or Wall Street or, you know, D.C. Beltway Republicans, you know, the Nikki Haley's of the world, the Mitt Romney's of the world, you know, the Fred Uptons of the world. You know, when you hear them talk about, you know, MAGA supporters or you know, Trump supporters, they're even, in many cases, even more toxic and harsh and vitriolic than their Democratic counterparts are. And I think the reason for that is because it's an act of desperation. They're in fight or flight mode because they're terrified.
Well, George Bush, too, did he criticize the communist Obama one time in 8 years?
Not really, no.
But he was on Trump's case.
Endlessly.
Straight away.
Yes.
Straight away. No. Obama was bringing socialized medicine, gutting the military, all this Marxist garbage. Didn't raise a peep. But when Donald Trump comes along and says, let's put America first, let's bring back the good about this country, all of these good things that everybody loved. Black people loved it. Latino people loved it. That triggered George Bush too. That triggered him.
Well, and it's funny. I always love it how they're constantly crying and moaning and griping about how supposedly right wing populist Donald Trump supporters, right wing libertarians / proprietarians like myself, these pretty ordinary right wingers in this country, militia guys. They're always screaming about how we're anti-democracy and everything. But that's funny on a couple of levels. First of all, they never mention the fact that democracy is not an inherent good. In fact, it's inherently an evil.
When did the founding fathers ever talk about democracy? Where is it in the Constitution? You know what? And we're going to make it clear for listeners. People say, "Oh, you don't believe in democracy. You must be a Nazi or fascist." No, we believe in something much better than democracy. Where the individual rights are enshrined.
Rule of law.
Rule of law. That is, democracy is technically the majority rules. Well, if the majority votes to eat you tomorrow, well, that's okay. That's democracy. No, yes, there are elements of democracy in the system. You vote for certain candidates. The founding fathers designed it with small elements of democracy in the system because you had to do that.
The House of Representatives is democratic.
Exactly, but the senators were supposed to be chosen by the states, and every state got 2 senators, no matter if you're a little state or a big state.
Yep.
They wanted to divide the power up.
To restrain democracy.
Restrain democracy. You've got to have a certain amount of it, but it's got to be restrained. And so a constitutional republic is way superior to a pure democracy in terms of protecting minority rights, protecting individual rights, fostering a growing and strong economy, everything. It's vastly superior. And so I cringe when I see Republicans talking about our democracy. I cringe when I see Tucker Carlson talking about our democracy.
Right.
He doesn't get it if he thinks that way.
I mean, I don't think he's using it in the same sense as, the cultural Marxists are using it. But still, though, we should, as best as possible, we should try to eliminate it from our daily vocabulary.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And the communists use the word democracy too all the time. And
endlessly.
This is how they say it. This is what it means. Democracy is the will of the people. Who are the representatives of the people? The Communist Party the Communist Party are the vanguard, the representatives of the people. So therefore, democracy is the will of the Communist Party.
Always.
So that's why you had the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, the Korean Democratic Republic, North Korea.
Well, and it's funny, is to speak to that. We look at this ongoing war in between Russia and the Ukraine right here. You hear endless screaming from the U.S. State Department and from the New York Times, the rest of the mainstream media, that whole ilk. Democratic and neocon Republican voices on Capitol Hill about how we have a patriotic duty to support and uphold democracy in the Ukraine. The Ukraine's not a democracy. Zelensky is a puppet of the U.S. State Department. He was installed for the purpose of promoting the interests, the neoliberal, neoconservative interests of the U.S. military-industrial complex.
Yeah, I would differ on that point of view, but I take the point on what you're saying endlessly about, these are people who are destroying what they call democracy in this country, but they use it endlessly
for
other things. But we could debate the Ukraine issue a lot. But you're right. Democracy has become almost, on the left, it's become a synonym for socialism now. That's exactly
religion.
What it is.
Well, because you think about it, if they're going to say that we need to have democracy, which, they're ostensibly at least defining it as one person, one vote, the only context in which a system of pure one person, one vote makes any sense is if there is social and economic egalitarianism.
Yeah.
And so, for that, you need social engineering and a totalizing state.
Yeah.
That's what you need.
And you have a totalitarian state, which means there will be an elite running things, and that elite will be rigid, and it will never change. And you will never get into it.
But it'll claim to be democratic all the while.
Yeah, that's right. So just about everything the left says, the opposite is the truth of what they say.
It is, quite so. And like back to the Ukraine, just to mention something, another angle of this real quick, is like we're always told the Ukraine is a democracy. We got to uphold democracy in the Ukraine. The Donetsk and the Donbass regions, about 70+% of the populations there speak Russian as their first language. They consider themselves Russian. If you ask any of them, they identify as Russian. for the past decade at least, they've been viciously oppressed.
No, that is not correct.
Oh, really? Okay.
Look, I know people from there.
Mm-hmm.
This was national question politics.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians said, "How are we going to take the Ukraine?" This is what Hitler did with the Sudetenland. He said there are Germans in the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. There are Germans being oppressed by the Czechs. We have to go into Sudetenland and protect those Germans. That is exactly what Putin did with the Donbass. They were not being oppressed. I know people who lived there. They identified as Ukrainian, and now they identify a lot more as Ukrainian than they ever did before. And so that is, I think, that is an example of Russian propaganda. And we can debate the Ukraine war all you like, but I can tell you from people who lived there, there was no oppression. That was Russian little green men who made up a lie, just like Hitler did with Sudetenland, to justify an annexation of another country.
So do you think that the reason why Putin is doing that is because he has what I hesitate to use the term fascism because the left has turned it into such a meaningless wastebasket term, but do you think that it's kind of part of his I guess fascist dream of like a greater Russia, just as Hitler had dreams of a greater Reich?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit different from many on our side. Look, Putin is a communist.
Okay.
Okay, look.
He was a KGB officer for 25 years or something. Yeah.
If you go into the Donbass today, you'll see Lenin statues going up and you'll see red flags on the tanks. You'll see churches being shut down. They say Ukraine oppresses religion. Absolute fallacy. But, okay, Putin has held two major conferences, youth conferences, one in 2017 in Sochi, Russia, one this year in Moscow. The first one had 30,000 young kids from all over the world. They were all communists. They were there to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. Putin organized it and keynoted it. These 30,000 young communists were going, rah, rah, Putin, looking like he was Mick Jagger or something. And he told them, go for it. The future is yours. He just did the same thing in Moscow this year, inviting communists from all over the world to basically stir up the revolution. He is a neo-communist.
Do you think that he attempts to hide that or obfuscate that by promoting like conservative social values?
See, this is the thing. This is how it works now. The Chinese work the woke left. The Chinese work the left around the world. The Russians work the old Stalinist communist parties, but they also work the right. And so what they do, they've been portraying Putin now for 20 years as a Christian. The Orthodox Church is bringing back Christianity to Russia. This has been a targeted disinformation campaign against the American right and American Christians for a long time now. Now, the evidence that it's... look, how would I put it? See, wokeism is Chinese feminized communism. MAGA communism, which you see supporting Putin now, is more of a masculine Stalinist. We're tough. We don't like this woke garbage. This is Jackson Hinkle. This is Caleb Maupin. This is Hazaldin, people like this, and Tulsi Gabbard to a degree as well.
Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes. He gets into that a little bit. He's on the edges of that. But so what they do, see, this is the argument. Okay, look at China. China executes drug dealers.
They do,
right?
yes.
Okay, but they give tax subsidies to people who make the precursors to fentanyl so they can send it to Mexico, and then it comes over the border. It kills 80,000 American kids a year.
And the cartels smuggle it.
There's cartels, but the Chinese pay tax subsidies. So why are they anti-drugs for their own people, but they're pro-drugs for us?
Well, because they want to displace us.
They want to destroy us, and they want to keep themselves together. So why does the communist left is completely responsible for the gay rights movement, but in Russia, they crack down on it?
Yep. It's not allowed at all.
Because here, it's a socially corrosive force, and they're not going to tolerate it there. They're doing exactly what the Chinese are doing with the drugs. They don't want it in their country. They're going to export it to us, to destroy us. So
as much as possible.
A lot of Christians think, well, Putin's against the gays. Putin's against Soros, even though Soros has been working for the Russians for years.
He's against transgenderism, you know.
but his own people here promote it because the goal is to destroy us and keep themselves together so they can conquer us.
You know, and I do understand that you know, the way you're explaining it, it does make sense to me to a high degree. I guess, you know, before we start to close out, the one last thing I want to ask to that end is why, in your mind, do you think Putin at least tolerates and sometimes covertly collaborates with very far-right organizations and movements in Russia, such as the Russian Imperial Movement, that are openly neo-Tsarist and openly Orthodox nationalist? Why would he collaborate with them if in fact, you know, he's interested in promoting this global homo stuff?
Because he is working the left and the right. You know, he put Angela Merkel in power in Germany, a conservative, but who opened the door to millions of illegals. Okay,
Muslim migrants. Yep.
He is using the right. He has co-opted much of the American Christian right because he wants world control. And it was the American Christian right who stood with people like Reagan who put the Soviet Union in its place. He wants to neutralize that force. So there's been a massive propaganda campaign to promote things like monarchist systems, promote some of the so-called right-wing parties of Europe.
Orthodox nationalism, integralism.
A lot of that's why a lot of Orthodox people in this country now have you got the Orthodox who support Ukraine, you got the Orthodox who support Russia, and a lot of paleo-conservatives are becoming Orthodox now because they see Russia as the true Christian nation. But listen to this. 6% of Russians go to church each week. 6%. That's mainly to the Orthodox Church, which is controlled by the KGB.
Yes.
The Kirill is a KGB agent, the patriarch.
Yes, that's right.
If you are Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, if you are Baptist, if you are evangelical, you cannot bring up your children in the faith. You cannot proselytize outside your church. You'll be severely, severely restricted if you try and do those things. But Russia's the great Christian nation. It is an abortion rate 4 times that of America.
Yes.
A way higher divorce rate.
Alcoholism, drug abuse.
Through the roof. But Russia's this great bastion of Christianity. It is a scam to neutralize the European and American right who should be standing against Putin, because Putin is an ally of Xi.
Yes.
All this garbage about we're driving Putin to the arms of Xi, they've been allies for 30 years now.
So you know, for example, one of my, and, you know, I'm not going to drop any names here, but one of my best friends from my Pepperdine days, he's a real right-wing guy, really good guy, and he is Russian Orthodox by faith. He's not Russian, but by faith he is Russian Orthodox, and he commonly speaks of restoring Holy Russia. You know, bringing back the Tsar, and, you know, this sort of deal. So what you're saying is he's, you know, through his faith and through his socially conservative values, you would contend that he's fallen victim to a smokescreen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's.
And I'm sure he would virulently object to that.
Yes. Yeah.
But look, the Russians are the best in the world at disinformation and influence operations.
Well, the KGB were some of the best, aside from maybe the Mossad. You know, they were, you know...
they have a much bigger scale than the Mossad.
Yes.
You know, Mossad's very good at what they do, very efficient, but the KGB is 15, 20 times the size of them, probably 40 times the size of Mossad. I say, this is what I say. I joke, there are 3 main elements in Earth's atmosphere right now. There's nitrogen, oxygen, and Russian disinformation. Oh
yes, no, that makes sense right there. You know, because I don't believe for a second that the KGB truly disbanded. You know, after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Than it ever was. And there's never been a real break between. Look, all these people say we're going to use Russia to support China, to go against China. Russia and China are as close as Hitler and Mussolini. They had held major military exercises. They've had intelligence sharing operations since 1997.
High-level summits, too, between their leaders.
Yeah, and they have an unlimited partnership right now. And that was way before we ever challenged them on Ukraine or anything like that. Look, I contend this. The old communist dream has never been abandoned. And Russia and China are as much part of that movement as they've ever been. The unfortunate thing is we no longer recognize the reality of that.
And I'm guessing you would likewise contend that the reason why the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the modern incarnation of it, that is why they support culturally and socially conservative values alongside, communist class philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. They are very socially conservative. Because like Stalin was very socially conservative.
Yes.
When Lenin took over, it was free love, homosexuality was legalized, and that caused such chaos that under Stalin, they just cracked down on homosexuals, they cracked down on divorce. It was very socially conservative, because they understand social conservative values are what preserve a country. And when the Nazis, they'd almost destroyed the Orthodox Church, but when the Nazis invaded in 1941, Stalin revived the Orthodox Church, not because he believed in it, because he understood it was a patriotic force that would unify the Russian people and could be used to counter the Nazis.
For Holy Mother Russia.
For Holy Mother Russia.
As they called it.
And this is, unfortunately, this is what your friend has fallen into. He's confusing the message with the reality. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to Russia, it's way less religious than America. Mm-hmm. And I know how secular America is. I know how secular Europe is. But Russia is way 6 million people went to church in Russia last Christmas. Mm-hmm. 6 million in a country of 140 million. Guarantee a lot more Americans went to church.
Perhaps, my good friend has swapped, one set of propaganda for another.
Unfortunately, and so they use man's better nature. We respect religion. We see the disaster that secularism has brought here. So we say, Putin's standing against the gays. He's standing for the Orthodox Church. He's our friend. And meanwhile, he's fomenting revolution all over the world. He's driving Muslims into Europe. He is, he has already talked about how he's going to, and Medvedev, as deputy, said, we're going to reestablish the empire from Vladivostok to Lisbon.
Yes.
And plus, we're going to take back Alaska, by the way.
I think a few of the, I've heard of a few Alaskan bush people that might have a little something to say about that.
Yes, I'm sure they will too. But look, this is how I see it. I see Putin, Biden, and Xi and the mullahs pretty much on the same page on most issues. Mm-hmm. Yes, Biden's pretending to help Ukraine, but it's slow walking everything he possibly can. He will betray Ukraine the first chance he gets. Well,
they've already hinted that they're about to do that.
Well, exactly.
They've already said that, hey, this thing isn't tenable. This isn't sustainable. We're not going to be able to keep this thing up. And ultimately, the language that we've been hearing even from the mainstream media is that Zelensky and the Ukraine may have to sue for peace.
Well, that's what they're trying to make them do. Mm-hmm. And so when Trump was in power, Putin and Xi and Rocket Boy were on the back foot. They didn't know what this guy would do. Mm-hmm. So we had 4 years of relative peace. Okay, so we get this traitor Biden in office, mm-hmm. and Putin goes on the rampage. We get trouble in the Middle East. Rocket Boy's threatening Japan and South Korea. China's threatening the Philippines, Taiwan, and the west coast of America, by the way. All of this is happening because America is seen as weak, and they want to get their maximum advantage while they can. And that is why they're doing everything they can to stop President Trump, everything coming back to office, because Trump was working with the Australians, the Indians, the Japanese, and the Taiwanese to freeze out the Communist Party of China. To bring it down.
And they knew that.
They knew that. That's why we got COVID. That's why we got election steals. That's why we got Black Lives Matter.
And we got, we've got, of course, cultural warfare all over TikTok promoting, degeneracy to our kids, while the Chinese version of TikTok, pushes Chinese students to be,
right.
masculine and patriotic. As a matter of fact, the Chinese Communist Party passed a law that prohibited sissy men, what they called. It's literally, it is illegal to watch K-pop in China, or it's illegal for men to engage in whatever behaviors the Chinese Communist Party, decides are too feminine.
See, this is exactly my point. The Chinese promote TikTok here to rot the minds of our kids, but they use it there to promote their values.
Yes, they're
just like they do that. They kill drug dealers there, but they subsidize them here, just like Putin promotes the gay movement here but doesn't allow it there.
Strategy of subversion.
A strategy of subversion. They do not want their own they do not want the cancer they spread to us in their own country.
And that makes perfect sense because they want us to collapse and they will rise at a commensurate rate. But Trevor, thank you so much for bringing a lot of light, often unconventional and unorthodox light to this whole conversation. Real quick, what I'd like to do before we call it quits here is I'd like to queue up on the screen this blog post right here. I just thought we'd end on a lighter note with a little laugh. This is just some commentary from some local leftists with their usual, histrionics and hysterics. Right here.
Yeah, I saw this before.
Yes, I guess apparently, they think that me wearing a shirt with the term boogaloo is a reference to a desired race war, which I can assure you is absolutely not the case. And as usual, they're terrified of a cartoon frog. Of all the things in the world.
This is just what they do, Christian nationalism is a big bad thing now on the left. That means being a Christian who loves America. This was what sustained us for 200 years. This was good. What gave everything that we have is good. But this is bad now. Well, he went to a Christian nationalist church. They actually believe in borders at that church.
Can't have that now, can we?
Yeah, so this is what the left do. They make something that's completely normal and good into something that's bad, and to try and drive people away from support.
And the most extreme manifestation of that is, actually, this is a reference to an episode where I interviewed my own sister. She conducted some undercover sting investigations into Pornhub and some of the criminal activities that these porn companies engage in, like with human trafficking, child porn, revenge porn, what have you. And apparently the left has a problem with her exposing the criminal activities at Pornhub, which is very odd because they claim to support the rights of women and the rights of victims of sexual abuse, but for some reason, when somebody actually goes after the people that are funding and fomenting that for their own benefit, they have a problem with it. So it goes to show you where their hearts really are.
Yeah, look, left-wing morality is extremely flexible. We have certain moral beliefs, and we tend to stick to them, try and be consistent. The left-wing morality is anything that serves the revolution. If Pornhub degrades the minds of millions of young American people, great, it's revolutionary. You don't want this young woman, upsetting that. She's a reactionary.
Yes.
Even if they're doing criminal stuff, even if they're doing revenge porn and stuff, you should say.
Heinous crimes, yeah.
Heinous crimes. But that's all right as long as it serves the revolution. Selling drugs to kids is fine as long as it serves the revolution.
Their power. It's about their power, at all costs, and they care about nothing else. I think that's one thing in the midst of this that we can agree on unequivocally. But Trevor, thank you so much for coming on today. I think this conversation has been especially enriching and enlightening intellectually to our audience. And thank you so much for giving admittedly an unconventional and even dissident analysis of some of the global geopolitical situations that haunt us right now. That's very very courageous of you. You're obviously well researched, and I think that's going to generate a lot of debate and traffic in the comments, which is of course healthy. That's what we want. We want light shed on the truth, whatever it is, wherever it may be, no matter who it offends. But with that said, thank you again for coming on today, and thank you all out there for tuning in to this episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time, and until next time, stay free, keep God with you in your heart, and Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Death to tyrants.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and thanks for giving me the opportunity here. Thank you.
Justice to tyrants, absolutely.